I've been praying on this message for a couple of months now because it is a tough message. Not sure whether or not to post it. It will certainly anger some people, but several things have occurred that it seems that the Lord has put it on my heart to move this conversation about race a little further. Although, as a person of color, there can be race fatigue. But before I get to race, there was yet another shooting, this time in Alexandria, Virginia. A man angry with the way the government is going decided to indiscriminately shoot people who were practicing for a congressional baseball game. When the members of Congress would put aside their political animus and come together as one for a friendly game of baseball. Unfortunately, in a couple of weeks, the country will return to normal. It always returns to normal. Columbine, Aurora, Colorado, Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, the Pulse nightclub, San Bernardino, California. There have been 154 mass shootings in 2017 alone. 154 mass shootings in the first 166 days of 2017. But like all the others in the past, this country will go back to normal. A normal that seems to be devoid of the love of God this country likes to hold up as a so-called Christian nation. Whether it's sending people to war, shooting people on the streets of our cities, or disgruntled employees, what guns in America boils down to is people killing people. But America's love affair with guns is for another talk. The Minnesota police officer who murdered Philando Castile has been found not guilty of manslaughter. He will not return as a police officer. However, he will receive a bounty, a payout to assist him with finding another job and returning to his life, something Philando Castile will not be able to do. In her commencement speech at Williams College, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie reminds us of how easily injustice becomes normalized. Injustice against the black and brown body in this country has become normalized. It's been about a month since Second Lieutenant Richard Collins III was to have graduated from Morgan State University. Instead of graduating and serving his country, his family buried him. He was murdered, lynched on the campus of the University of Maryland because somehow we found ourselves in an alternate universe where it was during the Jim Crow era when blacks were required to get off the sidewalk when a white person approached. Sean Christopher Urbanski, a University of Maryland student, told the lieutenant, "Move to the left if you know what's good for you." Apparently, Collins did not understand that he had been thrown back in time and he was murdered, reminiscent of Emmett Till, who allegedly disrespected a white woman, Carolyn Bryant, who on her deathbed confessed that there was nothing young Till did that warranted his murder. Yet we know what crime Till and Collins committed, the age-old crime of being black in America and not knowing their place. Nooses have been found on college campuses, the National Mall, at the National African American Museum of History and Culture, and in the Maryland county in which I live, Montgomery County. White nationalist flyers have been posted on college campuses and in towns and cities that read, "Around blacks, never relax, stop the rape, stop the crime, stop the murder, stop the blacks. America is a white nation. Stop the Islamization of America." Bananas and nooses targeted the first African American female student government president at American University. The N-word was painted on the gate of the home of LeBron James. In Portland, Oregon, a white supremacist was taunting two women, one wearing a hijab. When three men stepped in, he stabbed all three, killing two. Let us never forget the murder by Dylan Roof of 9 members of a Bible study group of Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. At an Episcopal church in my own diocese, someone defaced a sign with "Trump Nation, whites only." At a college in Pennsylvania, there was a calendar invite for a daily lynching. and old images of African American lynchings were found. A black female Princeton University professor received death threats after her commencement speech at Hampshire College. Richard Spencer, a white nationalist of the alt-right movement, advocates for a whites-only state. Identity Europa also wants a whites-only nation. This country has not come close to eradicating its original sin of racism. Calls for conversation have led to non-conversations because until the truth is told about race in America, until the truth is told without regard to white fragility, until the truth is told that there are some whites who labor under the misconception that a deficient amount of melanin somehow entitles them to engage in domestic terrorism against this country's people of color, we will continue to delude ourselves concerning race. Yes, there has been progress. However, that progress is akin to the first 100 miles of a million-mile journey. There is still distance to go. What is in the minds of whites, some whites, whose forebears engaged in lynching, theft, murder, rape, torture, maiming, enslavement, segregation, the trails of tears, redlining, voter suppression, and disenfranchisement, a criminal justice system designed to maintain white supremacy, who now believe that this country is theirs and who benefit from that historical terrorism. That alleged racial purity is their inheritance and birthright, where even a single black face is a threat to their entire way of life. Thomas Jefferson likened slavery to holding the wolf by the ears, that there was no way the wolf, enslaved black people, could be released, because if the wolf was released, it would turn and destroy those who had enslaved it. But the wolf could not be held forever because the wolf was stronger. And when the wolf gained its freedom, and it would turn on the enslaver and destroy him. Is that the fear that if people of color are seen, treated as equals, they will turn on those who oppress them and continue to oppress them and destroy them? Is that the fear? Do whites fear payback? Do they fear retribution? At the beginning of Ramadan, Trump issued a statement wishing Muslims a blessed month, but then went on to talk about terrorism, as if there's a connection between the two. Islam and terrorism is an oxymoron. Islam is a religion of peace. One cannot be a follower of the Prophet Muhammad and be a terrorist, just as one cannot be a follower of Jesus and harbor hatred for his neighbor. Yes, you may call yourself an adherent of Islam, or you may call yourself a Christian, but that does not make you either if you hate and want to build walls. But what Trump should talk about, but he would have to go against the very people with whom he has surrounded himself, is white terrorism. That is not an oxymoron. White terrorism has been a part of the fabric of this country since the first Europeans stepped foot in America, before it even became the United States. What we are seeing, what we are experiencing today is white terrorism, plain and simple. The objective of terrorism is to intimidate, to coerce, to create fear. But white terrorism is not going to work. It has never worked. It has just pissed us off. From the terror of the Middle Passage, from the terror of the auction block, from the terror of being sold away, separated from family members, never to be seen again, from the terror of the lash to control and pace the labor of the enslaved, from the terror of the lash because blacks dared to steal themselves away to freedom, from the terror of the lash and death because they dared to state that they were human, the terror of rape, the terror of torture. It has been white terror, domestic white terrorism, that has been used in an attempt to control the lives of people of color. 400 years of white terrorism, which has yet to be abated. And to have a real conversation about race that will make a difference, we have to begin from the position of a complete history of white terror in America. This is not revisionist history. This is the history of this country, how it came into being, and how it has progressed on the backs of black and brown bodies. To have this conversation, we need to get those who are not at the table, those who see no need to be at the table, to the table. We need to get those who don't believe that the National African American Museum of History of Culture is their history. We need to get them to the table because those are the people who believe that somehow white is better, that this country is theirs, that they can say and do what they want against people of color with no repercussions. Those who will get upset at a comedian who holds up a fake severed head, but who said nothing when President Obama was burned in effigy, when he and the First Lady were likened to apes, threatened with lynching. Those who denied his American citizenship. What about Illinois Congressman John Walsh, who after the killing of the 3 Dallas police officers tweeted, "Watch out, Obama. Watch out, Black Lives Matter punks. Real America is coming after you." Real America? What is real America? Who comprises real America? Just whites? Don't you believe it? Rick Taylor is running for the 3rd congressional seat for Tennessee. He actually erected a billboard sign that read, "Make America White Again," and admitted that it was a play on Trump's campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." But the question that must be asked, although sometimes to do so is to waste one's breath, is this. Did he really think he could erect that sign and not have some blowback and then deny that it was racist? I mean, of course the sign was removed. However, what is the thinking behind the act? Racism is irrational. The belief that a group of people is superior to another group or groups because of skin color is irrational. Some people understand this. All too many do not. How do you fear a black person sitting next to you or drinking from the same water fountain or well or swimming in the same body of water or pool? And yet, as we know occurred, turn your baby over to a black woman and have that black woman nurse your child. You can't share a glass of water, but your baby can drink the milk of a black woman's breast. I mean, wet nurses. These black women were called wet nurses. One enslaved black woman was beaten because she switched breast. She nursed both her infant and the white baby, but one day the breasts were switched, or the babies were switched. The baby suckled at the breast normally used for the other, and she was whipped. I mean, did whites think that white milk was in one breast and chocolate milk in the other? Did they really believe that different milk came out of the breast? Or was it the nipple? The nipples were switched. There was a white nipple and a black nipple. Except for the act which created the babies, is there another act so intimate as to suckle at a woman's breast, and yet you cannot share a meal, share a chair, cannot share the air? Racism is irrational. As so-called Christians, how did whites murder blacks, their brothers and sisters, and still call themselves Christians? How did white men look at their own black children created through the act of rape, look them in the eye and then sell them off? How do you sell off your own flesh and blood? How do you strip the flesh off the backs of your own flesh and blood with the bullwhip? How do you lynch men and women knowing that they are your own children? Baldwin asked how white women had black men lynched, knowing those black men were their lovers. Lynching in 1912, Forsyth County, Georgia. Rob Edwards was lynched and his bullet-riddled body laid out all night on the lawn of the Forsyth County Courthouse. It laid out there as a threat to others who would stray out of their place. Michael Brown's body was left to bake on the street in the hot August sun after he was murdered by a Ferguson police officer, Officer Timothy Loman, who killed 12-year-old Tamir Rice in 2014, has been fired, not because he killed Tamir, but because he withheld information concerning his previous employment when he applied to Cleveland PD. Get fired for lynching on your job application, but not for killing a 12-year-old child. I mean, lynching still occurs in this country. However, as James Baldwin wrote, you cannot lynch me without becoming something of a monster yourself. Lynching was used as a method of control, a form of terror, and the nooses found on our college campuses, on the National Mall, at the museum, are an attempt to instill fear, but it will not work. But think about the very act of lynching, the extra legal punishment for violation of white societal norms. Lynching families, white families, good, hardworking, church-going families. The day after a lynching, the very next day, these police officers, mayors, teachers, normal people who had staked out prime locations with children in their arms, cheered, collected souvenirs, body parts, mailed postcards, and then went to church the very next morning, had their pictures taken standing as the roasted and bullet-riddled bodies, already lynched, hanged from the poplar trees. In 1918, Mary Turner was pregnant. This occurred in Louds County, Georgia. She had the audacity to openly grieve the lynching of her husband, Hayes. She threatened to swear out warrants against the white man who abducted and lynched her husband. Before a crowd that included women and children, she was stripped naked, hanged upside down by her ankles, soaked in gasoline, and roasted to death. A white man sliced open her belly with a hunting knife, and the infant fell to the ground, gave a cry, and was stomped to death. These were superior human beings. In 1998, James Byrd Jr. was lynched by dragging by 3 white supremacists in Jasper, Texas. Sean Berry, Lawrence Russell Brewer, and John King dragged Byrd for 3 miles behind a pickup truck along an asphalt road. Byrd, who remained conscious throughout most of the ordeal, was killed when his body hit the edge of a culvert, severing his right arm and his head. The murderers drove on for another mile before dumping his torso in front of a black cemetery in Jasper. Over 4,000 people, mostly black, have been lynched in this country by always white people. And that number is probably not exhaustive. Again, from Baldwin, whites have become moral monsters, unable to see the humanity in people of color, unable to see people of color as human, not worthy of the same rights and privileges and advantages they want for themselves. It is not a race issue. Rather, it is a moral issue that involves race. Many whites owe their land, their real estate and livelihood, their prosperity to the racial cleansing of the 1830s by Trump's favorite president, Andrew Jackson. The camps Indians were placed until forced to march the Trail of Tears were called concentration camps, actual words used by witnesses then. Camps used for Native Americans who would not go voluntarily, who would not leave the land that God had given them, would not leave even after attempting to become white, after attempting to assimilate. Native Americans disenfranchised in courts. U.S. Congress passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and forced all natives, all indigenous peoples, to be relocated west of the Mississippi. Then land lotteries were used to redistribute native land to whites. The whites rushed in, took the land, took the property left behind, made it theirs. No different than when the Japanese were forced into internment camps during World War II. These citizens lost their homes, their businesses, their property to the whites who reveled in the misfortune of their neighbors. Native Americans thought they could live in peace with the Europeans, but not so. Native land was taken, stolen time and time again, as one treaty after another was broken by the United States. And then whites, when they find that there are some of their own who believe in the equality of people of color, they turn on their own, kill their own, harass their own, terrorize their own. It's a moral problem. Death and theft, tools of the morally corrupt. In 1921, as many as 300 African Americans were killed, murdered, and more than 9,000 were left homeless when the small town of Greenwood, Oklahoma was attacked, looted, and literally burned to the ground by whites, known as the Black Wall Street. Do you think that anything that was left was not appropriated, stolen by whites. 7 other black towns were also destroyed by whites who benefited from any property that was left standing. Theft by destruction and murder. Even when blacks separated themselves from whites, they were not safe. But how do you claim a land where people are killed, raped, tortured, imprisoned, forcefully removed? It's like a burglar who comes into your house, steals everything, commits rape, kills the inhabitants, and then comes back and claims the house as his. I mean, that's moral insanity. But that's what whites have done over and over and over again. I mean, we don't need an apology. What is needed is admission. Claim the wrongs done. Accept responsibility. When whites kill out of racist rage, they are deemed to be mentally ill, while black and brown people are called terrorists. Perhaps it is a mental illness on the part of whites. What is it about the white mind that incubates the belief that this country is somehow theirs, that they own it, that they can determine who can and cannot live here? Of course, the racist vitriol has been given license by the current occupant of the White House with his Make America Great Again. The presidency of Barack Obama unearthed the deep-seated hatred for the black body. But the presidency and rhetoric of Donald Trump has emboldened those who previously had held their hatred inward. Racism is protected under the banner of free speech, but it is not the first time. But those who forget the past or ignore the past or sanitize history are doomed to repeat it, not the first time. Look at Woodrow Wilson, who wrote in 1918 in the History of American People, quote, "A great KKK had risen after the Civil War and helped rid the South of the intolerable burden of governments burdened by ignorant Negroes," unquote. Having such a man in the White House at that time emboldened white supremacists across the nation. Wilson also had a private showing of D.W. Griffith's 1950 movie, Birth of a Nation. Serving as president between 1913 and 1921, he also racially segregated the bathrooms and cafeterias of government buildings that had been integrated since Reconstruction. This was a racial cleansing conducted at the highest level of government. It's happening again. It's happening today with the help of ICE. The Southern Poverty Law Center has reported that more than 1,300 hate incidents have been reported since the 2016 election, with anti-immigrant threats being the most prevalent. But why should we be surprised? The black and brown body has always been exploited and then shunted aside. We are a nation of laws and not of men, we are proud to say, but those laws codify the racist ideals of the men who are able to finagle their way into power. We've seen laws that prohibited immigration of Asians after their labor was exploited to build the railroads. This is nothing new. Steal, take over, annex land, abandon out of fear, tricked into selling, and pure terrorism. These are all tactics that have been used by whites to maintain a tenuous hold on this country. 6 Native American tribes are requesting, as we speak, federal recognition. The Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Upper Mattaponic, Rappahannock, Monacan, and Nansemond tribes, part of the Powhatan Federation. These are Eastern Virginia tribes whose forebears met the colonists of the first permanent English settlement at Jamestown in 1607. These tribes were literally erased from existence. Walter A. Plecker was a Virginia state official, a eugenicist and avowed white supremacist who ran the state's Bureau of Vital Statistics from 1912 to 1946, and he pushed the Virginia legislature to pass the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, which criminalized interracial marriage and required that every birth in the state of Virginia be recorded by race, with the only options being white and colored. Paper genocide by pen and paper, again nearly wiped out the Native Americans who need proof of ancestry to gain federal recognition. People whose forebears were born in this country must now request that they be recognized as legitimate by a government that stole their land, practiced genocide, and broke treaties. And yet, we can never forget the crimes committed by those who believe that they are superior. perhaps superior criminals because they've killed, maimed, raped, and stole. But by wiping the crimes of the past out of memory, generations of otherwise decent, law abiding white citizens could go on believing that each new violent episode, violence against a person of color, was an extraordinary event for which they had no real responsibility. Aberrations, they were called, anomalies, they are called, but they are not. They are par for the course. They occur every single day in this country, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Of course, there are plenty of books and articles that detail these crimes, but all too many whites will not read them, will not want to deal with the crimes of their forebears, don't want the crimes of their forebears visited upon them. But until those crimes are faced, acknowledged, and there is repentance, we will have to keep the pressure on, constantly reminding them of their crimes and sins against humanity. As I close, I want to end with a quotation from Martin Luther King Jr. from his letter from a Birmingham jail. Quote, "First, I must confess that over the last few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season." End quote. We could begin to end racism in earnest if whites would publicly state that this country is racist, and as recovering racists, it is necessary for them to call out the disease of racism and to repent. For those whites who want a whites-only state, it will not be on these shores. If you want a whites-only state, a whites-only country, then find an uninhabited land, an uninhabited island, and go there. But make sure it is uninhabited, and then work the soil yourselves. Plant and harvest the crops yourselves. Cut the wood for your houses yourselves, and build those houses yourselves. Birth and raise your children by yourselves. Nurse your children yourselves. Clean up behind yourselves. Do everything for yourselves and by yourselves. Rely on your own labor and ingenuity and see how far you get. And when you don't work fast enough, when you don't work long enough, when you don't work well enough, make sure you use the lash to increase production. To have a conversation, a real conversation, to see a change that will be long lasting, to have a country where every single person has the opportunity to be who God has called them to be, where they are free to use their God-given gifts, where our children today are able to live without fear tomorrow, are able to live without the albatross of race around their necks. Whites today must claim racism. They must claim slavery. They must claim near genocide and lynching. They must claim discrimination and segregation. They must claim duplicity while fostering the belief of racial purity while raping Black women. They must claim redlining. They must claim school choice as a guise for whites-only schools. They must claim it all because they benefited from it all. Anyone who claims the moniker white must also claim it because white was also created by the same Europeans who created the construct of race to divide and diminish the people of God. When this occurs, when everything on the checklist has been checked off, then and only then will we as a people be able to have a conversation about race. Then and only then will we be able to have any hope for reconciliation.